Yes, it was a mash. It was a monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. Yes, the vocal group was about to arrive. The Crypt Kicker 5. Yeah, it was good stuff. See ya. Thought today we'd keep working our way through monster movies with some horror double features. What better way to enjoy classic horror films than one right after the other? So let's take a look, see what we've got. We've talked about the 1941 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Spencer Tracy, a good film, not my favorite adaptation, but certainly serviceable. This DVD also contains the 1931 version, which won Frederick March his Oscar for his role as Jekyll and Hyde. The 1931 version I like better. It's a lot more artistic with some really clever camera stuff and lighting and angles, all kinds of weird things. A lot more artistic. And it's also a much more, I think, direct story, making it more clear that Mr. Hyde is very dangerous and evil, and also making it very clear what Ivy's occupation is. The 1941 version kind of skirts around that part a little bit, so it's nice that we get a much more direct adaptation. The 1930s were a pretty loose decade for films versus the 40s, which were very conservative, so it's nice that we get them both here. And both are great films, perfect for Halloween watching. I think the 30s one is a little bit better. Speaking of 30s horror films, one that is almost always forgotten is the 1933 color film Mystery of the Wax Museum, with Lionel Atwill as Ivan Igor, the great sculptor. Another film we've talked about in previous videos is the 1953 House of Wax with Vincent Price. A great film, but I think both are really good films. This DVD contains both of them, and it was one of, if not the first time that this 1930s one was released to home video. This disc I found at a thrift store, which is what that big green price tag is. This one is actually a promotional copy. I think it came in some kind of bundle or collection at some point. It was only available there. Someone donated it, so I picked it up. But it's nice to have both of the titles readily available. The 50s one, of course, is obsessed with 3D, sometimes to the point of being cheesy. The 30s one was mostly obsessed with it being in color, obsessed with experimenting with color. Much better than Dr. X, a film we've also talked about on here, in terms of execution, I would say. Both interesting movies, both pretty seminal to the evil wax museum horror genre there. Let's go to later in the 50s now for Curse the Demon and Night of the Demon. Night of the Demon is one of my absolute favorite horror films of all time. It is a great movie. It has aged extremely well and is still scary today. It combines both psychological and monster-based visual horror really well, setting the precedent for things to come, I'd say. The demon monster still, even many decades later, holds up. So these are actually two alternate edits of the same movie. Curse of the Demon is the shorter one. I believe that was released in the United States, and Night of the Demon is the full cut, which was released in England, as I recall. If I got that wrong, please do tell me. Curse of the Demon's about 80 minutes. Night of the Demon is almost 100. I don't know that anything was cut. I always watch Night of the Demon, I'll be straight up with you. I might have watched Curse maybe once, but I don't think anything of great substance was cut when it was re-edited for the US market. If you know of something that was, please comment below, let me know, let all of us know. Like I said, I always stick to the British one. Speaking of 50s double features, we're going to take a couple forays into sci-fi land today, as many older films did. Horror and sci-fi were kind of combined into one genre. But here you can see 1958's It, The Terror from Beyond Space, and 1957's The Monster That Challenged the World. The Monster That Challenged the World has really cool monsters, but also has a very slow pace, and it's not particularly inspired. And I've never been a big fan of Tim Holt, so that's kind of a reason there. But on the other hand, I really like It, The Terror from Beyond Space, a film that inspired Alien. I like it as much as Alien, actually. It's a much different kind of movie, of course, but astronauts trapped on this ship with this unstoppable monster. It's very atmospheric, and I like it a lot. It's kind of underrated. It gets shouted out every now and then, but definitely worth checking out. And if you like, giant insect-like creatures, you might like Monster That Challenged the World. And we'll jump into the 60s. Village of the Damned, a great film based on the book The Midwich Cuckoos. I've never read it. Dominic Noble did a great review on it and a great comparison to the film, so I'm very curious to actually read it someday. But Village of the Damned works really well. I know there was a remake. I don't remember the remake being very good. I haven't seen it in a long time. But I love the original. One of the best creepy child films, and George Sanders does a really nice job in that. I will say I don't remember Children of the Damned very much. I've watched it once. I don't remember liking it. I know it's one of those kind of government conspiracy, harnessing the power of the children kind of thing. Ian Hendry was in it. He was the original lead on a great show, the original British TV show, The Avengers. We think of Patrick Macnee today, but Ian Hendry actually was the lead first. So I'll have to rewatch this one, maybe closer to Halloween, and see. But Village of the Damned, I cannot recommend enough. Great film. I'm going to skip around to the 80s. Here's Teen Wolf 1 and Teen Wolf 2. Teen Wolf 1 is kind of a cult classic. I like that it uses Surfin' USA, that really weird synthy remix from the mid-80s there. See, I got some Beach Boys content in. Michael J. Fox is the boy who inherits his family's lycanthropy and becomes a basketball star and does lots of other wacky 80s teen hijink things. Not as good as Back to the Future, of course, but honestly a really fun film. There are definitely some parts that have aged in the way that, you know, 70s and 80s teen and college comedies do, that make them somewhat difficult to watch today, but not as badly as many of those, of course. Still a lot of fun. And Teen Wolf 2, the sequel with Jason Bateman, I don't remember this one very well. I've only watched it once. I remember it being very redundant, just kind of the same thing over again. I remember watching it and, you know, it being okay. So I guess if you're looking for just something you can kind of shut your brain off and just enjoy, you could do much worse. But first Teen Wolf, a lot of fun. Speaking of sequels and the 80s, we've got The Fly and The Fly 2, The Fly from 1986. We'll get to the originals here in a second. And its sequel from a couple years later with Eric Stoltz. If you don't mind some gross body horror, The Fly is really good. It's well acted, it's well made. Yes, it'll probably give you nightmares, but at the same time it's a really cool movie. And an inspiration for movies that people today are much more familiar with, like District 9, for example. Definitely worth seeing. I like The Fly 2. Fever Dreamland Theater has a great video on The Fly 2 with more details about it. I highly recommend checking that one out. You know, some people dismiss it as redundant. It is kind of the same story retreaded, but I think it does a little bit different with like the protagonist being technically a child in some ways. You have to watch the movie for that to make sense. But it's interesting, and I really enjoy it. So the original Fly movies, I know we talked about the very first one in one of my VHS videos, but here's the collection for the Fly movies. This is the original trilogy from the 50s and 60s. I like The Curse of the Fly the best. I thought that was really good. But something interesting that I'll leave you on today is that nowadays you can actually buy, even probably at your local big box retailer, a bigger box set that has all five, the original trilogy and also the two remake, and then the remake and its sequel, I guess I should say. So that's always really cool there. So this has been repackaged together now for a whole new generation. So horror double features, nothing new, and you can buy classics like Dracula and Frankenstein packed together. Do you have a favorite double feature? Or is there one film that you always think should be followed up by another? Please do share your thoughts on any of these films. We have one more Halloween adventure next week, and then back to the Beach Boys in November. Brought out my Creature from the Black Lagoon t-shirt today, with the Invisible Man. Give him a break, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.